Eleanor Whitman had everything money could buy: a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a collection of rare art, and a Fortune 500 company that bore her name. What she didn't have was someone who saw beyond the wealth to the woman drowning in loneliness beneath designer clothes. Marcus Johnson had nothing but the clothes on his back, a worn journal filled with poetry, and a spot beneath the 59th Street Bridge he called home. What people didn't see was the Harvard education, the brilliant mind derailed by tragedy, or the dignity he maintained despite losing everything. Their worlds collided on a rainy Tuesday evening when Eleanor's Louboutin heel snapped on a sidewalk grate, sending her tumbling into Marcus's makeshift shelter. In that moment her expensive suit soaked through, his calloused hands helping her up. Something fundamental shifted in the universe. Neither knew it yet, but this chance encounter would save them both. The rain hammered against the pavement, turning New York City into a blur of neon reflections and hurried silhouettes. Eleanor Whitman clutched her Burberry umbrella tighter, cursing herself for dismissing her driver earlier. Board meetings always left her with a throbbing behind her temples, but today's had been particularly brutal. Shareholders questioning her leadership, doubting her vision simply because she'd turned 50 and remained unmarried, childless, distracted, as one board member had put it. 20 years building Whitman Industries from nothing, and still, they saw her as somehow incomplete. The crack of her heel braking sent her stumbling forward, umbrella flying from her grip as she braced for impact with the wet concrete. Instead, strong hands caught her, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "Whoa there. I got you." Eleanor looked up into the face of a black man, perhaps in his 40s, with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that held a depth of experience at odds with his tattered coat and weathered backpack. "Thank you," she managed, embarrassment flooding her cheeks as she tried to regain her composure. One heel broken, her $3,000 suit splattered with street water, and her dignity in shambles. The man retrieved her umbrella, shaking it out before handing it back. "These grates are treacherous in heels. Seen it happen 100 times." Eleanor noticed they were standing at the edge of what appeared to be a small encampment tucked into an alcove near the bridge. Supports a cardboard windbreak, a sleeping bag, a few books carefully wrapped in plastic. "You live here?" The question escaped before she could filter it. The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes: pride, perhaps, or resignation. "Home sweet home," he said, gesturing to the modest setup. Marcus Johnson, resident of the 59th Street Estates. Despite everything, Eleanor found herself smiling at his gallows humor. "Eleanor Whitman. Of Whitman Industries," Marcus finished, surprising her. "Your face is on the business section often enough." Eleanor shifted awkwardly on her broken shoe. "I should call my driver." "You should get out of the rain first," Marcus said, nodding toward his shelter. "Unless the idea of sitting with me for 5 minutes is too uncomfortable." There was no judgment in his voice, just a simple acknowledgement of the chasm between their worlds. Eleanor hesitated, years of city-honed caution battling with something else: intuition, perhaps, or simple human recognition. "I'm not uncomfortable," she said finally, stepping carefully into the sheltered area. It was surprisingly neat, almost methodical in its organization. Marcus offered her a milk crate to sit on, which she accepted, placing her broken shoe beside her. He remained standing, giving her space. "How does someone like you end up here?" Again, the question escaped unbidden. Marcus leaned against the concrete wall. "Same way anyone does. Series of losses, few bad choices, system designed to keep you down once you fall." He paused. I had a life once. Wife, tenure-track position at Columbia teaching literature. Then Lisa got sick cancer. Insurance covered the basics but not the experimental treatments. Mortgaged everything, emptied our savings. Eleanor listened, the sounds of the city fading around them. She died anyway. University had replaced me. Couldn't make the mortgage payments. Depression hit hard. He shrugged, the gesture containing multitudes. 3 months later, this became home. I'm sorry, Eleanor said, meaning it. Don't be. I'm still here. Still breathing. Still reading Whitman, no relation to you, I assume. He pulled out a weathered copy of Leaves of Grass from his backpack. Eleanor shook her head, something tightening in her chest. Here was a man who had lost everything yet spoke without bitterness, who maintained his dignity and even his sense of humor amid circumstances that would have broken most. Her phone buzzed, her assistant wondering where she was. Reality intruding. My driver, she explained, standing up. Thank you again, for catching me. Marcus nodded. Anytime, Ms. Whitman. Watch those grates. As her town car pulled up moments later, Eleanor found herself looking back at the small shelter, at the man who had shown her more genuine humanity in 5 minutes than she'd experienced in years of corner offices and penthouse views. Eleanor couldn't explain why she returned to the bridge the next day. She told herself it was simple gratitude, a hot meal and a new pair of boots for the man who'd helped her. Nothing more. Yet as her driver pulled up near the spot, she felt an unfamiliar nervousness flutter in her stomach. Marcus was there, writing in a worn journal. He looked up, surprise crossing his features before he schooled them into neutrality. Ms. Whitman. Didn't expect to see you again. Eleanor approached, clutching a paper bag from an upscale deli and a shopping bag from Timberland. I wanted to thank you properly. For yesterday. Marcus set his journal aside. No thanks necessary. Nevertheless. She held out the bags awkwardly. He didn't reach for them immediately. I don't need charity, Ms. Whitman. It's not charity. It's gratitude. She met his gaze directly. And it's Eleanor. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition, perhaps, that her gesture came from somewhere genuine. He accepted the bags with a nod. Then thank you, Eleanor. She should have left then. Mission accomplished. Instead, she found herself asking, what are you writing? Marcus hesitated, then handed her the journal. Poetry, mostly. Helps make sense of things. Eleanor opened to a random page, reading lines that took her breath away, vivid imagery about resilience, about finding beauty in broken places. The words resonated with something hollow inside her. This is extraordinary, she said, meaning it. Have you tried to publish? Marcus laughed, the sound rich despite everything. Hard to approach publishers when your return address is a bridge. Eleanor handed back the journal, an idea forming. Would you have dinner with me tonight? Somewhere proper, I mean. The question surprised them both. Marcus studied her face, looking for the punchline, the hidden agenda. Why? It was the right question. Eleanor considered her answer carefully. Because yesterday was the first real conversation I've had in years. Because your poetry moved me. Because I run a media conglomerate with a publishing division. She paused. And because I'd like to talk with someone who sees me as a person, not a balance sheet. Marcus was quiet for so long Eleanor thought he would refuse. Finally, He gestured to his appearance. I'm hardly dressed for wherever you're thinking. We can fix that. She held up a hand as his expression hardened. Not charity. An advance. If your other work is like what I just read, our publishing house would be interested. It wasn't the whole truth. She wasn't thinking as a businesswoman in this moment. But it gave him a way to accept without losing dignity. That evening, they sat across from each other at a small Italian restaurant, not the Michelin-starred establishments Eleanor usually frequented, but somewhere intimate where Marcus, now dressed in simple but dignified new clothes, wouldn't feel out of place. Over pasta and wine, their conversation flowed effortlessly. Marcus spoke of literature, of teaching, of his wife with a tender grief that time had softened but not erased. Eleanor found herself sharing things she'd told no one: the loneliness of success, the emptiness of achievement without connection, her fear that she'd built an empire at the cost of a life. You still have time, Marcus said quietly when she expressed this regret. I'm 50, Marcus. And I'm 47, living under a bridge. His eyes held hers. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that it's never too late to start again. The question is whether you're brave enough. As they parted that night, something had changed between them: not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two souls who had somehow found each other across an impossible divide. What neither realized was how their unlikely connection would soon transform both their lives in ways neither could imagine. 3 weeks passed in a blur of dinners, long conversations, and growing trust. Eleanor found herself drawn to Marcus's wisdom, his resilience, the way he saw beauty in a world that had shown him little kindness. For Marcus, Eleanor represented not just a lifeline from his circumstances, but a kindred spirit, someone equally isolated, though for entirely different reasons. They kept their friendship private. Eleanor knew how it would look to her board, to the society pages, the CEO and the homeless man. Marcus understood this without resentment, having long ago made peace with society's prejudices. On a crisp autumn evening, Eleanor invited Marcus to her penthouse for the first time. He stood at her floor-to-ceiling windows, taking in the glittering panorama of Manhattan below, a view most New Yorkers only saw in movies. Beautiful, he murmured, but lonely. Eleanor joined him at the window, their reflections ghostly against the night skyline. How did you know? Because it matches your eyes. He turned to face her. All this success, and still something missing. She didn't deny it. What about you? All that knowledge, that talent, wasted under a bridge. Not wasted, he corrected gently. Waiting. Eleanor moved to her desk, retrieving a document folder. I have something for you. Inside was a publishing contract, real, legitimate, with an advance substantial enough to change his circumstances. Your poetry deserves to be read, Marcus. My editors agree. Marcus stared at the contract, emotions warring across his face. This isn't because we're friends. Eleanor finished. No. It's because you're brilliant. The friendship is separate. He nodded slowly, accepting this truth. Then he reached into his new jacket, pulling out a folded newspaper clipping. Then I have something for you too. Something I should have shared sooner. Eleanor took the yellowed clipping, dated 5 years earlier. It featured a younger Marcus receiving a prestigious literary award. The caption identified him as Dr. Marcus Johnson, acclaimed poet, and Columbia University professor. You were famous, she said, confused. Why didn't you tell you? Marcus sighed. Because after I lost everything, I discovered how differently the world treats you when you're homeless. How invisible you become. I wanted to know if you'd see me, the real me without the credentials. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, respect deepening, barriers crumbling. There's more, Marcus said quietly. The experimental treatment Lisa needed. It eventually proved effective. It's saving lives now. Lives of people who can afford it. Eleanor's publishing company was part of Whitman Industries, which had a healthcare division. A division that had acquired the very pharmaceutical company that now produced that treatment. The medication costs thousands per dose, Marcus continued without accusation. Insurance rarely covers it fully. Families bankrupt themselves, just like I did. The revelation hit Eleanor like physical pain. Her company, her decisions about pricing, about profit margins had real consequences. Consequences that had shaped Marcus's tragedy. I didn't know, she whispered, though the excuse sounded hollow even to her ears. Of course you didn't. His voice remained gentle. CEOs aren't supposed to see the Marcus Johnsons of the world. The system works that way by design. Eleanor felt tears burning behind her eyes, not just for Marcus and his wife, but for the person she had allowed herself to become, insulated from the impacts of her business decisions by boardrooms and balance sheets. I can change it, she said suddenly, the words surprising even her. The pricing structure, the accessibility. I have that power. Marcus studied her face, seeing the transformation beginning, compassion awakening from a long slumber. I believe you do, he said simply. In that moment, standing in her luxurious penthouse with a man who had lost everything partly because of systems she helped maintain, Eleanor Whitman made a decision that would alter the trajectory of both their lives and countless others. The press release went out on a Monday morning. By noon, Eleanor Whitman's name was trending across all social media platforms, her face splashed across financial news networks worldwide. Whitman Industries slashes cancer drug prices by 70%, CEO cites moral imperative. Eleanor sat in her office, watching the markets react in real time. Whitman Industries stock plummeted as shareholders panicked over projected revenue losses. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing, board members demanding explanations, industry colleagues questioning her sanity, reporters hungry for the story behind the story. She had expected this. Had prepared for it. What she hadn't anticipated was the other reaction, thousands of messages flooding in from patients and families whose lives would change because of her decision. Stories of second mortgages, of children's college funds emptied, of impossible choices between treatment and financial survival. Stories like Marcus's, multiplied by thousands. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Her assistant poked her head in. The board is assembling for an emergency meeting. They're calling for a vote of no confidence. Eleanor nodded. Thank you, Claire. And, there's someone else here to see you. A Mr. Johnson? He doesn't have an appointment. Eleanor's heart stuttered. Send him in. Marcus entered, dressed in the simple but dignified clothes she'd helped him purchase. His expression was troubled. You're all over the news, he said without preamble. Yes. Because of what I told you. Eleanor stood, moving around her desk. Because it was the right thing to do. At what cost? They're saying you could lose everything. He gestured to the financial news playing silently on her office television, the downward graphs, the grim-faced analysts. Not everything that matters, she replied quietly. Before Marcus could respond, Eleanor's office doors burst open. Richard Harrington, her largest shareholder and most vocal board member, stormed in, face flushed with anger. "Have you lost your mind, Eleanor? 70%? Without board approval?" His eyes landed on Marcus, narrowing with suspicion. "Who is this?" Eleanor straightened, something steely entering her posture. "Richard, this is Dr. Marcus Johnson, acclaimed poet, and former Columbia professor. Marcus, this is Richard Harrington, who believes profit margins are more important than human lives." Richard sputtered. "That's not this is business, Eleanor. We have responsibilities to our shareholders. And to humanity," she countered. "To basic decency. Is he why you're doing this?" Richard demanded, gesturing dismissively at Marcus. "Some charity case you've taken on." Marcus remained perfectly still, his dignity in stark contrast to Richard's bluster. "Dr. Johnson lost his wife because our pricing made treatment inaccessible," Eleanor said, her voice deadly calm. "His story opened my eyes, but this decision is mine alone. The board won't stand for it. We'll vote you out." "You can try." Eleanor's smile was thin. "But first, you should know I've invited the press to our meeting. I imagine they'd be very interested in hearing board members explain why they believe cancer patients should go bankrupt or die." Richard paled. "You wouldn't." "I've spent 20 years building this company, Richard. I know exactly how to fight for it." She gestured to the door. "Now, if you'll excuse us." After a moment of sputtering rage, Richard left, slamming the door behind him. In the silence that followed, Marcus studied Eleanor with new eyes. "You knew this would happen. You were prepared." She nodded. "I've been playing corporate chess for decades, Marcus. I may lose some pieces, but I won't lose the game. Why risk it all? Your position, your company." "Because you were right," she interrupted softly. "About what matters. About it never being too late to change." She held his gaze. "About being brave enough to start again." Outside her office windows, camera crews were already assembling on the street below, the media frenzy growing by the minute. The battle ahead would be brutal, public, potentially devastating. But for the first time in years, Eleanor Whitman felt truly alive. The boardroom resembled a battlefield. On one side sat Eleanor, flanked by the 3 board members who supported her decision. On the other, Richard Harrington led the opposition 8 stern faces united in their determination to protect profit margins at all costs. Between them, recording every word, sat journalists from major publications. "This isn't about compassion versus greed," Richard argued, careful of his image with the press present. "It's about sustainability. Yes, we could slash prices temporarily, make a splashy headline, but what happens when research funding dries up? When we can't develop new treatments?" Eleanor leaned forward. "Our R&D budget is $1.2 billion annually. Executive bonuses last year totaled $400 million. Our CEO, that's me, made $38 million. She let the numbers hang in the air. "I'm proposing we cut executive compensation by 60%, eliminate shareholder dividends for 2 quarters, and redirect those funds to offset the price reductions." A murmur ran through the room. Eleanor hadn't shared this part of her plan with anyone. "You can't be serious," one board member sputtered. "Completely serious. I'll start with myself." She slid a document across the table. "I've instructed payroll to reduce my salary to $1.2 million effective immediately." The rest of my compensation will fund patient assistance programs. The journalist scribbled frantically. This was no longer just a business story, it was a seismic shift in corporate ethics playing out in real time. Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is emotional decision-making, not business leadership. Is it? Eleanor pulled up a presentation on the boardroom screen. These projections show that while short-term profits will indeed fall, long-term market share will likely increase as patients who previously couldn't afford our treatments gain access. Additionally, the publicity value alone. Publicity? Richard scoffed. That's what this is about? Some midlife crisis played out in the press. Eleanor's expression hardened. No, Richard. It's about a woman named Lisa Johnson, who died because our medication was priced beyond her reach. It's about her husband, who lost everything trying to save her. It's about thousands of families facing the same impossible choice right now. She stood, commanding the room. For 20 years, I've made decisions based solely on shareholder value. I've justified exorbitant pricing as market reality. I've ignored the human cost of our profit margins. Her voice never wavered. I was wrong. And I'm using whatever power I have left to make it right. The vote, when it came, was narrow but decisive, 7-5 against Eleanor, removing her as CEO of the company she had built. As the boardroom emptied, reporters rushed to file their stories. Richard approached Eleanor, his victory tempered by wariness of the watching press. "You knew you'd lose," he said quietly. "Yes. Then why?" Eleanor gathered her papers calmly. "Because some defeats matter more than victories, Richard." Outside Whitman Industries' gleaming headquarters, Marcus waited on a bench, watching the media circus. When Eleanor emerged, no longer CEO but standing straighter than she had in years, he rose to meet her. "It's done," he asked. She nodded. "They voted me out." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She took his arm, ignoring the photographers capturing the moment. "The price reduction stance, they can't walk it back without a PR nightmare. And I still own 26% of the company's shares." Marcus studied her face. "What will you do now?" For the first time in decades, Eleanor Whitman had no 5-year plan, no strategic objectives, no corporate ladder to climb. She had only the certainty that she had finally done something that mattered. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I'm looking forward to finding out." As they walked away from the building that had defined her life for 2 decades, neither noticed the homeless woman watching from across the street, clutching a prescription she could now afford to fill. 3 months after her ousting, Eleanor sat across from Marcus in a small cafe in Brooklyn, far from the corporate towers of Manhattan. Between them lay the first printed copy of his poetry collection, Bridge Lessons, published by a small but respected literary press, not Whitman Media, which had withdrawn their offer after Eleanor's departure. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "It exists because of you," Marcus replied. "Even after everything fell apart with Whitman, you made calls, opened doors." Eleanor shook her head. "I just made introductions. Your work speaks for itself." The month since the boardroom showdown had transformed them both. Marcus had secured a small apartment in Brooklyn and a part-time teaching position at a community college. Eleanor had sold her penthouse, moved to a modest brownstone, and started a nonprofit focused on healthcare accessibility. They'd grown closer, their friendship deepening into something neither had expected to find at this stage of life, a partnership of equals, built on mutual respect and understanding. "There's something I need to tell you," Marcus said, his expression serious. "Something I learned yesterday." Eleanor set down her coffee. "What is it?" "Richard Harrington has been digging into my past, looking for anything he can use against you. He's desperate to discredit your decision, prove it was based on manipulation rather than ethics." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "That sounds like Richard. He found something." Marcus took a deep breath. "About Lisa's treatment. The timeline doesn't match what I told you." Eleanor went very still. "What do you mean?" "The experimental treatment wasn't actually available until after Lisa died. We couldn't have accessed it even if we'd had the money." He met her eyes directly. "I let you believe your company's pricing policy contributed directly to her death. That wasn't entirely accurate." Eleanor sat back, processing this revelation. "Why didn't you correct me?" "Because the larger truth still stands," Marcus said firmly. "Thousands of patients face financial ruin because of pharmaceutical pricing. What happened to us losing everything to medical bills, me ending up homeless, that was all real. The system is broken, Eleanor, whether or not it broke in exactly the way I initially presented." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Part of her felt manipulated, used as a weapon in a larger battle. Another part recognized the complicated truth of his position, a man who had lost everything, including his voice, finding a way to create change through the one person who would listen. "Richard will use this," she finally said. "He'll say I was duped by a con artist with a sob story. That I destroyed shareholder value based on a lie. I know." Marcus's voice was heavy with regret. "I should have told you the full truth from the beginning. I was afraid that I wouldn't act if the connection wasn't personal," Eleanor finished. "That I needed to believe my company had direct responsibility." Yes. The honesty between them hung in the air, painful but necessary. "Were you using me, Marcus?" The question was direct, her gaze unflinching. He didn't look away. "Not intentionally. Not at first. But when I saw the position you were in, the power you had, yes, I let you believe something that wasn't precisely true because I thought it might help others like Lisa." He paused. "I've asked myself every day if that makes me a bad person." "And what answer did you reach?" "That good people sometimes make compromised choices for the right reasons." His eyes held hers. "Something you understand better than most." Eleanor thought about her own career, the countless ethical compromises she'd made in service to shareholder value. The thin justifications. The human costs. "What happens now?" Marcus asked quietly. Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling something shift and settle inside her. "Now we face Richard together. With the whole truth this time." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "No more half-truths between us. No matter how uncomfortable the whole truth might be." Marcus nodded, relief and something deeper passing between them. "No more half-truths." The conference room at the Four Seasons was packed with journalists when Eleanor and Marcus arrived. Richard Harrington had spared no expense for his moment of vindication, this press conference designed to expose what he called the manipulation behind Whitman Industries' disastrous pricing decision. Eleanor wore a simple navy suit, her once highlighted blonde hair now its natural silver. Marcus stood beside her in a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches, every inch the professor he was gradually becoming again. Richard's smile was predatory as they entered. "Eleanor. Dr. Johnson. So glad you could join us." Eleanor nodded coolly. Wouldn't miss it, Richard. As cameras flashed, Richard launched into his carefully crafted narrative, how Eleanor Whitman, once a titan of industry, had been manipulated by a homeless man with a fabricated story. How her emotional decision had cost shareholders billions. How the timeline of Lisa Johnson's illness proved the deception. In short, Richard concluded triumphantly, Ms. Whitman destroyed decades of corporate value based on a lie. When he finished, the room turned to Eleanor. She approached the podium with quiet dignity. Everything Mr. Harrington just said about the timeline is correct, she began, shocking the room with her immediate concession. Dr. Johnson's wife died before the treatment in question was available. That specific detail was inaccurate. Richard's smug expression faltered slightly at her calm admission. But here's what Mr. Harrington doesn't understand, Eleanor continued. That detail doesn't matter. Not to the thousands of patients who now have access to life-saving medication. Not to the families who no longer have to choose between treatment and bankruptcy. She gestured to a screen behind her, which displayed dozens of letters from patients benefiting from the price reduction. These are the people Mr. Harrington would prefer to ignore, the human beings behind the profit margins. Eleanor turned directly to Richard. You came here hoping to destroy my reputation, to prove I was fooled. But the only fool in this room is anyone who believes corporate success should be measured solely in dollars rather than in lives improved. Marcus stepped forward then, addressing the journalists directly. My wife died because we couldn't afford her care. We lost everything trying to save her. That part was always true. What happened to us happens to thousands of Americans every year, not because treatments don't exist, but because they're priced beyond reach. A reporter raised her hand. Dr. Johnson, did you intentionally mislead Ms. Whitman about the timeline? Marcus didn't flinch. I allowed an assumption to stand uncorrected. It was wrong, and I've apologized to Eleanor privately. But I will never apologize for helping create change that's saving lives. Another reporter turned to Eleanor. Do you regret your decision, knowing what you know now? Eleanor's answer was immediate. Not for a second. In fact, she paused, looking at Marcus briefly before continuing, we've come today not just to address Mr. Harrington's accusations, but to announce the launch of the Johnson Whitman Foundation. Murmurs spread through the room as Eleanor explained the foundation's mission, to advocate for pharmaceutical pricing reform, fund research into affordable treatments, and provide direct assistance to patients facing financial barriers to care. We're seeding the foundation with $50 million, the majority of my personal wealth, Eleanor concluded. Because some things matter more than money. As questions erupted from the journalists, Richard Harrington slipped out a side door, his moment of triumph transformed into a PR disaster. Later, as Eleanor and Marcus left the hotel, a young woman approached them tentatively. Excuse me, she said. I just wanted to thank you. My mother has the same cancer that took your wife. Because of the price reduction, she's getting treatment we couldn't afford before. As the woman embraced first Marcus, then Eleanor, something profound passed between the unlikely partners, a recognition that from the ashes of their respective losses, something meaningful had emerged. Not redemption, exactly. Something more complicated and more honest, purpose. 1 year later, Eleanor stood at the podium in the Johnson Whitman Foundation's new headquarters, a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, its industrial bones softened by living walls of greenery and open, light-filled spaces. Before her sat an audience of healthcare advocates, policy makers, patients, and press, gathered for the Foundation's first annual conference. When I was CEO of Whitman Industries, Eleanor began, I measured success quarterly. Stock prices, market share, profit margins. Now, we measure success in lives improved, in families kept whole, in systems changed. From his seat in the front row, Marcus watched her with quiet pride. Their partnership had evolved in ways neither could have predicted. Not into romance that wasn't what either needed, but into something perhaps more rare, a profound alliance of purpose and mutual respect. The foundation had already achieved significant victories. 3 major pharmaceutical companies had followed Whitman Industries' lead, reducing prices on critical medications. A bill addressing prescription drug costs was gaining bipartisan support in Congress. Patient assistance programs had helped over 12,000 families access treatments they couldn't otherwise afford. None of this happened because one person made one decision, Eleanor continued. It happened because thousands of you refused to accept that healthcare should be a luxury. Because patients shared their stories. Because doctors spoke truth to power. Because ordinary citizens demanded change. As she spoke, Eleanor caught glimpses of familiar faces in the audience. Claire, her former assistant, who had quit Whitman Industries to join the foundation. Dr. Patel from Marcus's wife's oncology team, now heading their medical advisory board. Even a few former board members who had privately reached out, admitting she had been right. Richard Harrington was notably absent. His attempt to discredit Eleanor had backfired spectacularly, turning her into something of a folk hero. 6 months earlier, under pressure from activist investors, he had been removed as chairman of Whitman Industries. After Eleanor's speech, the foundation unveiled its newest initiative, the Lisa Johnson Memorial Scholarship, providing full funding for medical students committed to serving underserved communities. The first recipient, a brilliant young woman from Marcus's old neighborhood, had overcome homelessness herself to pursue her dream of becoming an oncologist. Later that evening, as staff cleared away the last of the conference materials, Eleanor found Marcus on the rooftop garden, looking out over the Brooklyn skyline toward Manhattan's glittering towers. "Penny for your thoughts, Professor," she asked, joining him at the railing. Marcus smiled at the title. He had recently accepted a full-time position at City College, teaching literature and a new course on social justice narratives. "Just thinking about paths," he said. "How the worst day of your life can sometimes lead to exactly where you need to be." Eleanor nodded, understanding completely. "If my heel hadn't broken that night. If I hadn't lost everything." They stood in comfortable silence, 2 people who had seen each other at their most vulnerable and most powerful. "The board at Whitman called again," Eleanor said eventually. "They want me back as CEO." Marcus turned to her, eyebrows raised. "Are you considering it?" She shook her head. "That chapter's closed. Besides, I'm exactly where I need to be." Below them, the last of the conference attendees were leaving: doctors, patients, advocates, all part of the movement they had helped catalyze. Among them was the young woman whose mother had benefited from the price reduction, now a foundation volunteer. "We've made a difference," Marcus said softly. "We've made a start," Eleanor corrected. As twilight deepened around them, neither felt the need to move or speak further. They had crossed worlds to find each other, the millionaire and the homeless man, each with something the other desperately needed. Not romance. Not rescue. Truth. And in that truth, both had found something neither wealth nor wisdom alone could provide, the profound peace that comes from living in alignment with one's deepest values, and the quiet joy of doing so in the company of someone who truly sees you. What Eleanor and Marcus discovered through their unlikely connection transcends the particulars of their story. They learned that true wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios or corner offices, but in the courage to stand for something larger than self-interest. That dignity persists even when everything else is stripped away. That it's never too late to realign your life with your deepest values. Their journey reminds us that the divisions we create between rich and poor, powerful and powerless are ultimately artificial. Beneath our circumstances, we share the same fundamental needs: to be seen, to matter, to leave the world better than we found it. Perhaps most importantly, they discovered that transformation rarely happens in isolation. Eleanor needed Marcus's perspective to recognize the human cost of her business decisions. Marcus needed Eleanor's platform to create systemic change. Their individual journeys of redemption became powerful precisely because they intertwined. Their story challenges us to look beyond appearances, to recognize the humanity in those society renders invisible, and to examine the systems we participate in, asking not just "is this legal?" or "is this profitable?" but "is this right?" In the end, both found that the path to healing begins with a simple but profound choice: to see clearly, speak honestly, and act courageously no matter the cost. This story isn't just about Eleanor and Marcus, it's about all of us. About the systems we participate in, the assumptions we leave unquestioned, and the power we have to create change when we truly see one another. What would happen if we all had the courage to cross the divides that separate us? To recognize the humanity in those society has rendered invisible? To question whether the systems that benefit us might be harming others? Share this story with someone whose perspective differs from yours. Start a conversation about what true success looks like in a just society. Consider the spaces where you have influence: your workplace, community, family, and ask how you might use that influence to create more equity. If Eleanor's journey resonates with you, examine your own relationship with wealth and power. If Marcus's resilience inspires you, look for ways to amplify the voices of those struggling to be heard. Most importantly, remember that meaningful change rarely happens in isolation. It begins with connection, with truly seeing another person's reality and allowing it to transform your own. The bridge between worlds is built one honest conversation at a time. Are you ready to start building?